been thinking at this conference about who I would ask students to read or engage with in a course on digital rhetoric.
There's so many good ones. That makes it really difficult.
I am teaching rhetoric this term, a graduate course, and next week. We're looking at an article by Lunsford and Ede that's actually, 15 years old or so, that argues that, to use the terminology of continuation or rupture, that actually all of this new stuff is really more continuation. And then we're reading Colin Brook that suggests that's actually rupture.
I've taught a number of digital rhetoric classes, and the one book I keep coming back to is Colin Brook's Lingua Fracta.
Likely it would be Colin Brook's Lingua Fracta.
I would pick Colin Brook's Lingua Fracta.
I think it does a fantastic job of taking classical rhetoric and folding it right into new media technologies. Being able to provide students with an introduction to the classical, the canons, right, is an extremely important heuristic.
I find it exponentially more interesting than maybe a reading that looks at some of the more end user interfaces that students are likely to encounter, but don't necessarily tell as full a picture for me as what the digital technologies they're using do, or how they work, or how they influence the kinds of rhetorical activities the students are going to engage in.
It's the method that he uses to talk about the canons, to use sort of the received terms of rhetorical theory and then remake them for these digital environments. And I think that model is really useful for the field in general.
I'm a fangirl of Jody Shipka, so probably I've told everyone to read Towards a Composition Made Whole. And a lot of her work on Kairos and enculturation with Paul Pryor, and a lot of the remediation work that they've done there with digital text. Her new story, Inhabiting Dorothy, is one of the most sort of interesting projects I've seen that sort of thinks about archives and these pop-up archives in really new and interesting ways. So that's where I would start.
And what I like about Jody Shipka's work is that it doesn't depend upon anything being digital.
Same thing goes for Jody Shipka. So the multimodal task-based framework is really where I'm at in terms of assignment design and even assessment. So I know that they're going to understand that you have a sort of open task, and that part of the task is not just completing it, but making certain purposeful choices along the way and being able to account for those choices, right?
I really like Sarah Arroyo's new book on participatory media, and I really like Jody Shipka's book. Both those books, I think, are both practical and theoretical in attempting to really work with what digital or new media forms make available and see where that leads us into innovative pedagogical forms.
Very influenced by Marshall McLuhan's work.
The one book I'd always have them read is McLuhan's Understanding the Media, right? Understanding Media, The Extensions of Man.
McLuhan.
He legitimately gets you to question the act of mediation, right? And to think about what that means in terms of, not only in terms of technology as we think about it, but in terms of material culture, in terms of all these other ways in which we think about how we interact with objects and artifacts in the world, and how that interaction is shaped by the various containers or messages and models, and right, that sort of shape, that sort of lend to this representation.
Then coming up later through people like Roland Barthes, who embraces contradiction as far as how meaning systems work, makes McLuhan sound even more sensible, because everything that seems to contradict each other in McLuhan's taxonomies or binaries of what is hot, what is cool, or how does the print work, or how do medium massage us over, etc. It's a put on. There's a joke. There's something that's kind of not to be taken so seriously all the time about this in terms of understanding it. So yeah, I dig McLuhan a lot.
I also really like Greg Ulmer's work, because I think Greg Ulmer's was one of the first to try to extract the logic of digitality, and in extracting that logic, apply it to new forms of writing.
It has to be the work of Greg Ulmer, and almost certainly his book Heretics, The Logic of Invention. Because my work, which I call cyber history, is a direct application of heretics.
Victor Vitanza and Craig Saper just came out with a collection called Electracy. It came out a couple months ago, and it's a compilation of Ulmer's works, selected works, not everything, of course.
And last night, Justin made the observation that there were 3 rhetoricians that helped define this area of inquiry, if you will, Lannon, Zappin, and Losch.
I suppose if I had to pick just like one, then I would say the sections of Liz Losch's Virtual Politic that talk about digital rhetoric.
I would probably use Liz Losch's Hacking Aristotle chapter from Virtual Politic.
I'd have them probably read some of the definitional work that we've been talking about at the symposium, so Liz Losch's definitional work.
Not only because it's incredibly readable and it's sort of one of those seminal texts, but because those list of 4 different ways to do digital rhetoric can be debated back and forth. So I think it's great because it can both start a conversation but also give a framework from which everyone can work.
And Doug Iman's new book, just because those works are already making efforts of trying to say who are we, why are we that way.
We're entering a great time for there to be books in digital rhetoric courses that are devoted to digital rhetoric. So I'm very excited about Doug Iman's book on digital rhetoric because Doug has that context of having been in the field for a while.
I think the two more important theories in digital rhetorics are Bolter and Grusin's remediation, and then kind of the notion of remix in general.
Bolter and Grusin, they're definitely, I don't see them at all as rhetoricians, but I'll say that this term in particular, that some of the students in the class are finding remediation very compatible with the work that they want to do in digital rhetoric.
So like how new media identify themselves according to what's pre-existing, how old media refashion themselves to stay current when their status is challenged by new media, and how that operates with text too.
If I really did choose one, the person that keeps coming to mind, which is odd, is Lisa Nakamura. She approaches digital representations and affordances in a way that deals with culture so directly in these concrete case study sorts of ways that I could then bring in some of the rhetorical stuff to just get them seeing how those acts are rhetorical.
One thing that I've been assigning a bunch lately is this piece by Jason Swartz, and it's all about the way today many writers are working in distributed environments in which the texts are also highly distributed, and they never see the outcome of their work as a coherent whole text. They're really just composing bits and pieces, and somebody else's schema are assembling those into a whole document. That is how CNN.com works, right? Nobody sits there and handpicks all those stories. At any given time, an algorithm is going to do that. And there are content providers all over the world putting information into their CMS. People don't get that intuitively.
In terms of non-print texts, there are a couple. RIP Remix Manifesto is a video. I like to watch that. Girl Talk videos. So if we're talking about digital culture, Girl Talk opens up all kinds of avenues for talking about art and its function, talking about remix and compositional practice and its function, and to talk about the effects that those things have on people, right? Talk about fair use, talk about copyright.
I would choose Claire Lauer's What's in a Name from Kairos. And there's a few reasons. It's both form and content. One, the content actually explores like the histories of new media, multimodality, digital spaces. But then also in form, she discusses at the very beginning how it starts off, I think, as a Prezi and then in Flash and then goes into HTML. So then there can be layered onto like the discussions of content about how to create a web text.
The web documentary Pine Point. It combines text and video and images and interaction, right? So like you can do things with the mouse on the screen and move stuff around, and it's a narrative, but you can also access the different chapters in different ways. It's a fascinating glimpse of how the affordances of the web can be used.
The one book that I have been having students read in digital rhetoric classes since I started teaching them in the late 90s is Borges's Labyrinths. Borges's short stories reimagine the world in ways that are strikingly resonant with what's happening in sort of digital rhetoric. And so I've used his work probably for 20 years thinking about this stuff. And that's a totally out of left field sort of answer. But that would be the one I would choose.